Greetings. This is a virtual lab on soil organisms. It's important that you've already watched the lecture. I'm going to review some key points there and then we'll get into the lab. I'm going to start with our typical soil. We say it's half pore space and it's half solid. Of the solid, the pore space size, we like half of that filled with water, the other half filled with air. Okay, and we're going to talk about how soil organisms may affect both of those. On the solid side, we had 5% of that was organic matter and 45% was the mineral matter. What we're going to concentrate on today is the 5% organic matter. Now within that 5% organic matter, 5% of that is living organisms, whether they're macro or micro. Macro means we can see them, visible eyes, like earthworms and mites and ticks and bugs and insects. And micro is what it sounds like, very small, tiny, microscopic. You can't see them. Things like bacteria and funguses and nematodes. So when we looked at those, we had a little discussion on how you're going to classify living organisms. And probably the best one is the WASI one that starts with, is it alive or not alive? And that gets into the discussion of whether a virus is a living or a non-living organism. Now what I've sketched here is what a typical virus would be. It's an outer sheath. You've probably seen the coronavirus one. It's a circular shape, but it's just an outer sheath. Inside of that is a single RNA strand. All by itself, a virus can't do anything. So the question is it really alive or not alive? Because it really doesn't breathe, it really doesn't do photosynthesis, it doesn't eat anything, it doesn't consume anything. But what it can do is attach to a healthy cell, and inside that cell's nucleus is its RNA strands. When those two come together, then they form the DNA, which is pretty much the blueprints or the brains of a cell that tell it what to do. So if this is a typical cell in your lungs, for example, it would divide and make more lung cells. If a coronavirus gets into your lungs, or if a virus gets onto a plant or a root or an organism, what it does is attaches to a healthy cell, sends the RNA strand down in here, it goes inside the nucleus, and it pretty much takes over production. I kind of look at it as, let's say I've got a engine or a bicycle factory. Let's go bicycle factory, and we got parts and things to build, it's metal things, and we can build a bicycle by following the plans. If I sneak in some plans that are motorcycle plans, we start taking the same the parts that the factory has, which the cell has, and instead of making bicycles, it starts making motorcycles. So that's kind of what a virus does. It takes over cell. Instead of just lung cell making more lung tissue, it makes more coronaviruses. And when you get enough coronaviruses in your lung, or any virus in your lung, it takes over and you see a symptom or a disorder within the organism. So if we kind of put those in there and call a virus its own thing, that's kind of where we started out with that of life. And then it went down into domains, which there are 3 basic domains, but where we're going to start off is one of those domains is what we're going to call living organisms that have cells and nucleuses with RNA and DNA strands. Within those, the 5 we want you to remember then is the most logical or the most commonly used is we're going to split those into 5 kingdoms. The first 2 are multicellular organisms. If they can carry on photosynthesis, they're plants. If they can't carry on photosynthesis, then they're animals. Now, the next one that they look at are funguses. They're multicellular, but they're kind of unique. They don't carry on photosynthesis, and they don't really reproduce and form 2 nucleuses and have sexual reproduction. They form and grow with spores. When I was in high school, there was only two categories, plants and animals. So back then, they considered funguses grew more like a plant, so they called them plants. But for this class, we're going to do the 5 kingdoms. So there's, you got funguses, and those can make up some of these 5% of the living organisms. Animals can make up 5% of these living organisms. Plant structures can make up 55% of these living organisms. The next one is bacteria or Monera. That's single-celled organisms. You've got protozoas in there and you have algae in there. Back in my day, the algae have a little bit of chlorophyll, so they had plant life. And then the protozoa would act more like an animal, so they call the protozoas animals. Okay, so we got plants, we got animals, and we got funguses, and we have bacteria. And what's the 5th one? My brain just went dead. I don't know what the 5th one is. So I'll come back to that as we're going through here. But what we're going to zero in on here today is we're going to do some experiments in looking at these. Within that 5% organisms live, you look at that top 7 inches, there's about 2 million pounds. And a good healthy soil will have 20,000 pounds of living organisms. So if we kind of get the zeros, that's 2 out of 200, or about 1% here is living organisms. The other 4% is dead and decaying and rotting organic matter. And when that organic matter gets broken down small enough and form a soil particle, it's called humus. Now remember that humus is a colloid that gave it chemical activities. There's a lot of good reasons why we need organic material. That's in the lecture. That's the second half. The first half is talking about the organisms. And what we're going to zero in today is one of the most common macro animals or macro organisms is the earthworm. Now the second part of this lab is you're going to watch 5 different YouTube videos. You'll see them in your assignments. You watch them and you record and you write something down. They will go through all of these microbes. We've got ones that are bad guys that they call it diseases and parasites. When we put these into their levels or their trophic levels, probably the best way to kind of look at where they all fit in is all energy starts with the sun, your plants, and some of your bacteria, and some of your one-cellular or algae, and some of your different types of bacteria can carry on photosynthesis. So they capture the energy from the sun, so they take the carbon dioxide and the water and they make a simple sugar, and that sugar is a carbon compound. That in turn is the building block for all living organisms. To be an organic living organisms, you've got these 5, 6 carbons, chains, benzene chains. You start building blocks, and that makes up our cells and tissues and organs, and the same thing with the plants. So when we kind of went through that, we were interested in the carbon cycle. So the carbon starts in the air, trapped by the plant. Then you've got things that are called herbivores. In other words, they live off of plants or dead plants. So various animals, various funguses, various bacteria lived on and eat these. They were the grazers and the shredders. Okay, so kind of look through that handout. I did look in the binder. I did give you those 3 key pages. I would highly recommend you look at those in depth, and those are the best reference to figure out what's going on here. Now, if a herbivore is ate by another living organism, we call them carnivores or meat eaters. Okay, so within that cycle, at trophic level, we have some of these organisms that are eating the plant life, and some of these animals are eating some of the other, or some of these critters are eating some of the other critters. So if they're eating the other critters, they're carnivorous. If they don't really care, and there's a few of them out there that are omnivores, so they can eat either or, okay? Now, as you continue through this is kind of like the carbon cycle going on. If you saw the rabbit was in there and ate some grass, and then the hawk ate the rabbit. That's that carbon chain going through. Now to complete the chain here though, we've got to get some carbon and we've got to get some nutrients back in the soil. And what happens there is you have some scavengers They're pretty much like a carnivore, except for they wait for the animal to die first, so they don't kill a living thing. And then your microorganisms like bacteria and fungus and protozoas decay and break down and put the nutrients back in the soil. Then the plant can take up the nutrients, carry on photosynthesis. So without these organisms in here, this natural ecosystem is out of balance, out of whack. We don't get the pore space we need, we don't get the air we need, we don't get the water we need, we don't get the amount of humus we need in the soil. Remember that humus is the key source, our only source for nitrogen, and probably only our good source for available phosphorus and some other nutrients. So if you kind of put everything together we've been talking about, organisms play a critical role in maintaining a balanced environment. So what we're going to kind of do today is we're going to look at one of these macro critters, the earthworm, and see what it does. So I'm going to take a little bit here, I'm going to spin around, and I'm going to turn the camera to the other way, and we're going to try to conduct a couple different experiments, and I'll talk about what you have to keep track of. So let me spin the camera around here, get this situated so it looks like it's pointing at where I'm going to be standing. Sorry, my camera's not cooperating. I want to get it level with the table. So that's probably going to work there. Okay, now what would be handy here is if you stopped, if you're watching this, if you have not run off your sheets yet that are in the assignment, there's one that's called Earthworm Activity in Biology number 11. That's the first experiment we're going to do. So if you have that handy, it'll be easier for you to follow through. I'm going to read it though. It says earthworms are the most important macro animal present in the soil. They burrow through the soil, eating organic matter and ingesting soil. Earthworms eject large quantities of soil and partially decomposed organic matter that enhances the fertility and productivity of the soil. The holes left behind by the earthworms serve to increase the aeration and drainage of the soil. Earthworms multiply rapidly in cool, moist, but not too wet and not too hot, not too cold soils. If there is an adequate food supply, such as grass clippings, vegetable peelings, compost, other things that are dead in the soil there. One of the experiments you're going to see from Purdue is earthworms kind of live down there about 5 feet, and then they migrate up to the top during certain months, and what they're looking for is some food, and if we have a healthy environment, there'll be some organic matter up in there. So what we're going to do here is it says find a healthy worms. So I got some healthy worms here. Actually, hopefully they're healthy. I went and got them at Walt's Crawlers at my local grocery store. It says pour them a dark colored high organic topsoil, which I've done here. That's a dark colored organic soil. Don't look real dark there, but remember when you get something wet, to find out the true color, we get a nice dark soil. This is actually some topsoil out of my old yard, okay? And then we need some subsoil that I kind of pulverized here, and it's a browner color, okay? So that's a brown colored soil, all right? Now it says to fill the bottom of half a jar with a light colored subsoil. So I'm going to use this water bottle I cut in half. I'll probably make a mess here, so I'm going to do this over my container here. I want to fill this half full. That's what I thought I'd missed half of it. So I'm going to call that close enough to half full. Okay. So I filled half of the bottom of that with some light colored soil. And then it says mix a small amount of food. Okay, my small amount of food is I just went right out the door here, and I got some leaves, and I've got some grass shavings here, and I kind of shredded them up. So I know that my topsoil that I'm going to use here has a little bit of food in it, so I'm going to mix those two together. So make sure there's something for those critters to eat. And then it says to fill up, mix a small amount of food and warmer and grass clippings and leaves, and and then you fill that a fourth of the way at the top. So I'm going to cheat here a little bit, just kind of pour it in there. Kind of hard to see, for you to see, but I can see there's a definite difference between the top soil and the bottom soil. Okay? Now here's where we're going to have to do some time lapse, or I'll actually come back later when we're recording some data here. It says how long did the wetting front take to reach the bottom. So what it says to do here is to put some water in the container. And then it starts a wetting front, and I'm going to time that. Okay, so I'm going to look at my clock here. Okay, the time is basically 2:45. So it'll probably after the video is over, but I'm going to keep track of that, and the next time we come back I'll give you the data there. But that's got a wetting front that's going down through there. And then after that gets soaked down through the bottom, it says drop the worms in and put a lid on loosely to permit air drainage. So when that wetting front gets through, I'm going to take a couple of these worms here and put them right there on the top. Then I'm going to reseal the top of this. I'm going to put an opaque projector in it. Actually, I'm going to wrap that in foil because worms don't like it too bright. Okay? And then we're going to check on those here and over break, and I'll come back when this is all over with, and then we're going to remove the lid and see what happens here in a couple weeks. So right now there's really nothing to write down. I just wanted to demonstrate how the thing is working. So what we're going to do here is let that saturate down through there. The point we're going to show is if earthworms do what they're supposed to, they're going to eat down through there, they're going to poke holes through the soil, and they should open up the porosity, and the next time we do a wetting front, it should go through there quicker. That's the goal anyway. So that's experiment 1. Okay. Experiment 2, you need to have run this off also so you can follow along. It's called the Earthworm Lab. The abstract says this experiment was conducted to determine how the presence of earthworms in soil can affect plant growth. The experiment was done by comparing the germination and growth of tomato, green beans, and radish plants in soil samples that contain earthworms with those that did not. Okay? Now I'm going to shift this around a little bit. We're going to use corn and soybeans and some radishes. Radish seeds are pretty small. Okay? I got my worms are escaping here that I put them back where they belong. Hey, get back in there. All right. Okay? So, earthworms are segmented worms that live in soil. That's key to remember. They burrow holes in the ground and create networks of tunnels that move inside the soil and helps aerate the soil. Air movement, get that 50% pore space up filled with air. The size of the burrow depends on the diameter of the earthworm and can range from 1 millimeter to 10 millimeters. These networks of tunnels by earthworms help the soil absorb more water during rainfall, and this reduces the erosion caused by surface runoff. So if we get more saturate, more infiltration, remember we've looked at that on water, the faster the infiltration, the less the runoff. Earthworms feed on soil and decaying matter in the ground. A single acre of land may have as many as 1 million earthworms, and each worm can digest the equivalent of their body weight of soil and organic matter every day. So the more earthworms we have, the healthier the soil. We've kind of forgotten about these good buddies out into when we're doing our normal corn and soybean production. A lot of our practices have chased them away for adding fertilizer, too much tillage, for example, have been chasing away. So one of these reasons, another one of these reasons for cover crops and leaving crop residue is to enhance the growth of more earthworms. The organic matter in the soil that is digested by the earthworms are returned as castings. So they literally eat the organic matter, eat the soil, and they crap out castings, and those castings are high in humus, they're high in nutrient value, so they're adding stuff right back to the soil. The organic in the soil that is digested as castings, they're rich in nutrients, they benefit plant growth, they consist of organic and inorganic matter or materials that are broken down by bacteria and enzymes. So now we got bacteria and enzymes within the digestive tracts of the earthworms with some of those microbes or microorganisms we talked about. So the bacteria don't have to actually be in the soil. It can be in the digestive tract of some of these other animals. Earthworms help by feeding on the organic matter at the top layer of the soil and later redeposit it that deeper in the soil. They kind of live in their burrows throughout the profile down to about 5 feet. So if they come up to the top, they eat and get some of that organic matter, and then they move back down and they crap and put that out in the pores and lower soil. Okay? So what we're going to do here is carry on this little experiment. It says it needs a pack of tomato seeds and green beans and corn. So I went with corn, soybeans, and radishes. Then you need 6 plastic cups, soil to fill the 6 cups, about 30 earthworms, tap water, 1 measuring cylinder, and a ruler. Okay? The procedure for this experiment, the independent variable is whether or not the earthworms were present in the soil. The dependent variable is the height of the plants, and I'll measure those over break. You won't have to do that. I'll come back and tell you the results. So over the next 8 to 10 days, we're going to record this. This is determined by using a ruler to measure the height of the plants in each pot and calculate their average height. The constants, control variables, are the environment of plants are kept in temperature, humidity, light, the size of the pot. So we're going to use the same size pot. We're going to put them in the same containers, same amount of soil. I'm going to put a heating pad underneath it, and I'm going to water them all the same. We're going to label those corn, no worms, corn with worms, no worms for beans, worms with beans, no worms, radishes, excuse me, I'm walking off, worms with radishes, and then worms with radishes. Excuse me. I have to remember to come back to the camera. I'm going to water them once a day with the same amount. Basically what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this water bottle here and I'm going to give it a couple squirts every day. And then we'll see what happens. Okay? So then what you need to do is this, earthworms are added, 3 pots labeled with worm, 10 tomato, green, and bean are planted in each. So basically what I'm going to do is I'm going to put 10 corn seeds in each, and I'll push those down here in a little bit. Then I'm going to take soybean seeds and plant those, one with the worm or without the worms, and one with the worms. Like I said, I'll push those down a little deeper later. The radishes are the tricky ones because they're so small. So I'm just going to estimate and say I'm going to put a few of those in there and a few of those in there. That's probably more than 10. But now I have planted each one of these. I'll push these beans down here a little bit later. I'll get them down there about an inch, half inch deep. And then we'll see what happens. So I've put worms in there already, but I'm going to add one more to each so you can see what we did here. So the ones with worms, we put 10 worms in there. We put 10 worms in that one. And we've put 10 worms in that one. So kind of come over here and look a little better where you can see everything. So I've got those pots there. I'm going to take those home, set them on a table in my garage, and put a heat lamp or a heating pad underneath it and a grow light above it and keep the light on for about 10 hours a day. And then we'll see what happens. And then we'll record that data. You have a data sheet. Basically, all what you can put today is the date that it was planted. So we've got, what is it, 11/20. Actually, you'll be watching it. I planted it on Tuesday, so that's going to be 11/24. And then you can fill in the crop. You can put corn for the first column. You can put beans for the second column. And you can put radishes for the third column. And then we've got without earthworms and with earthworms. And then I'm going to come in here and take the height after so many days. So that pretty much concludes what we're going to do there. When you watch the 5 videos, it's going to talk a little more in depth about some of the things that happened. But these were the experiments. If you guys were here, I'd have broke you up into groups and made you make all this stuff, plan all this stuff. And then throughout class, we'd come out and measure them. So what I'll probably do is just take still pictures of these when I measure them later. So there's nothing to turn on in here, but you've got a week to get the 5 videos watched and submitted by next Wednesday. We will submit these data sheets separate. So that kind of ends the day. We appreciate your patience with this COVID stuff, and hopefully we'll do a Zoom review before the test. Save your questions for that day. Thank you very much.